They say journalism is the first draft of history. But what kind of history are we writing today? Will we keep writing the same version of history? Will there be a different story to tell tomorrow?
Humanitarian need around the world is growing every year, but also the needs are changing. There are new crises, new contexts, new forms of suffering, new risks that can be mitigated.
Wars and disasters, climate change and refugees, these are in many ways the stories of our time. The impact of humanitarian crises are being felt around the world like never before.
Our coverage is a tool that humanitarian decision makers, funders, workers need and want to read to help them do their jobs.
We amplify the voices of people caught up in forgotten crises around the world, and we know the humanitarian sector well enough to hold accountable those who are meant to help. And in so doing, we try to bridge the gap between what's happening on the ground in these places and the decisions that are being taken by world leaders.
The new humanitarian wants to explore, analyze, explain, and find ways that the crises of tomorrow can be dealt with better than the crises of yesterday.
The new humanitarian reports from the heart of crises to inform the world's response. For the next draft of history on the critical issues of our time, follow the new humanitarian.
I'm very, very pleased to introduce Heba Ali, who has made all of this possible. She's the director of the New Humanitarian, and she's a journalist by training and has worked for over a decade in conflict zones around the world. She was a key part of IRIN's spin-off, the New Humanitarian, formerly IRIN News spin-off from the United Nations, and has really led this organization and brought it to what it is today. So I'm very pleased to welcome Heba on stage. She's also been recently recognized as one of the 100 most influential Africans in 2018, and also a young global leader by the World Economic Forum. So please join me in a warm welcome for Ms. Heba Ali.
Hello, everyone. You're live. Excellent. I should first say that, in fact, you're all here today because of Sarah's amazing efforts in leading us through what has been probably a much bigger process than you can ever imagine. So thanks again to Sarah and her team. As of this moment, the news organization that you have come to know and love for its dogged reporting on some of the worst humanitarian crises in the world shall no longer be known as IRIN News. So please join me, ladies and gentlemen, in welcoming to the world stage the new humanitarian. Now, before we go any further, I have a favor to ask of you, because we would like for this new brand to have ripple effects around the world. So all of you, take out your phones and take a selfie with yourself, with the person next to you, and tweet, Facebook, whatever social media channel you want, that you are at the launch of IRIN's new brand, the New Humanitarian. You've got the handle on screen, and I'm going to do the same. Good? Excellent. Thank you. You are now part of our marketing team. So I know that many of you are actually quite nostalgic about the name IRIN, even if you don't know what it stands for. So allow me to look back on what is now nearly 25 years of coverage of some of the hardest problems the world has faced. Beautiful little logo. Let's go back to 1995. Kofi Annan was then the head of UN peacekeeping. OCHA, the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, didn't even exist. And the Rwandan genocide had just shocked the world. And humanitarians that were working there at the time realized that they could have saved more lives if they had a better understanding of the crisis itself, if they had a better sense of where the needs really were, and if they knew who was doing what. So a few visionaries came up with this idea, and there is a fair bit of gossip and rumor about how it actually started. One story is that it was on a plane between missions, the other that it was scribbled onto a napkin at a bar. And how they came up with integrated regional information networks as the name is beyond me. But somehow they managed to take that sexy name and convince the UN to give them $500,000 to get this thing up and running, and IRIN was born. And, the first content that IRIN produced was these weekly roundups of aggregated news. And it was only really by fax machine that this stuff got out to the world. This was this was 1996, as you can see, a time before the technology of today. And it was only by accident that we started producing original content. And in 1996, a Christian youth leader from South Kivu in the Democratic Republic of Congo walked into our office in Nairobi and told our team at the time that his community, the Banyamulenge, felt under threat. Those tensions were the after effect of the genocide in Rwanda and turned out to be a trigger for full-scale rebellion. And the briefing that we published, based on his prompting, became one of the first comprehensive accounts of what would go on to become a civil war that, for all intents and purposes, continues until today. So that was 1996. We, a few years later, launched our first website at a time when most of the aid sector was still trying to figure out what email was. And so while it might not look very flashy by today's standards, this was avant-garde at the time. From there, and from that first story on the Congo, we would go on to open offices around the world, launch a radio service, a film unit, French translations, Arabic translations, even a mobile app. And we would spend the next 25 years bearing witness to world-changing events and the people whose lives they upended. Just as HIV and AIDS was becoming the leading cause of death in sub-Saharan Africa, we created a specialist news service dedicated to covering the virus. When the conflict began in Darfur, we were one of the first news organizations to physically send a journalist into the region. The Aceh earthquake and tsunami of 2004, we were on the ground. Some of the lower profile crises, like the locust invasion of West Africa, which saw swarms of giant insects decimating entire countries, millions of crops, and leaving people hungry. When post-election violence erupted in Kenya in 2007, we were right there, very literally, in the middle of it. In 2008, we began reporting on what was then an unknown tension with a small ethnic minority group in Myanmar. And of course, you've all heard of them today. They are the Rohingya. But this was in 2008 that we began warning of the problems that lay ahead for this community. How about these guys? Boko Haram. Their rise was not when the Nigerian schoolgirls were kidnapped. This piece dates to 2009. Some of the two biggest issues on the global agenda today, climate change, is on everyone's lips. But 10 years ago, we were documenting its human impact. Migration to Europe did not begin in 2015, as the mainstream media might have you suggest. Back in 2012, we were documenting the cold response that migrants and refugees had on the front lines of Fortress Europe. There was the earthquake in Haiti, the floods in Pakistan, the famine in Somalia. When conflict broke out in Syria in 2012, the top UN official gave IRIN an exclusive interview in which he told us for the first time that civil war was on the way. And when the world finally started paying attention to the civilian impacts of the war in Syria, we tried to ensure that other conflicts wouldn't get forgotten in South Sudan and in the Central African Republic. When Ebola struck in 2014 in West Africa, I remember well that there were UN staff that refused to deploy because of the risks involved. And we were there with our journalist in a PPE suit reporting from inside the hot zone. Our world-leading coverage on Yemen cost our contributor his life. And he was so committed to telling the story of how the humanitarian crisis was destroying his country. But while all of this sounds very heavy, our coverage has had a few lighter moments, racy even. 50 Shades of Aid, humanitarian dating, was quite a hit. And this piece on the HIV risk of anal sex and how it was misunderstood by heterosexuals started with vaginal sex, thigh sex, even armpit sex. People have sex in a lot of ways. That isn't necessarily the award-winning work, but our work has been recognized around the world. It is presented at conferences. It is read in 190 countries and republished in newspapers, local and international. But most of all, it has had an impact in improving the lives of some of the most vulnerable people on Earth. And sometimes that's very personal. In 2006, our reporting on Liberia turned up in a refugee camp in Guinea, where teachers in a makeshift school were using it to teach Liberian refugees about their own history. And this story in 2010 of a young Yemeni girl who at 10 years old was married to an older man who beat her and drugged her prompted readers from around the world to fork up $1,000 so that she could repay her dowry and get a divorce. But sometimes the impact is at the systems level. The piece we did exposing a hidden war in Congo-Brazzaville went on to become evidence used to submit a claim to the International Criminal Court. And some of our reporting that we have increasingly produced on the aid sector itself, and this story in particular, which exposed a massive UN corruption scandal in Uganda, prompted donors to pause their funding and demand an investigation and accountability. So 25 years of putting this kind of journalism to the service of the world's most vulnerable. I wasn't there when it started, but I can certainly say that's quite a legacy. So let's give that a round of applause. So, with all of this cherished heritage, why would we change our name and our brand? In fact, it's long overdue. The planning for the spin-off of IRIN from the UN began almost exactly 5 years ago, and we have changed incredibly as an organization, both within the UN, but especially after we left the UN to become independent. We've changed to become punchier, to be more relevant, and to reflect the changing realities that we're seeing. Those realities range from the humanitarian needs themselves, which are changing, as you know. New threats like climate change are creating new drivers of humanitarian need. Conflicts are lasting longer and are much more decentralized. And the international mechanisms that used to be used to resolve international challenges are no longer working as multilateralism faces threat. The impacts of humanitarian crises are changing too, and having much more global repercussions. And the exodus of refugees from Syria is just one of many examples of that. And finally, the response to crises is changing. And we're seeing new approaches and new players emerging to fill an increasing gap between the needs and the response. Ordinary citizens were pulling refugees out of boats in Greece. Students have taken to the streets to protest climate change. Private sector technology like artificial intelligence is being used to forecast famine. And in the face of rabble-rousing nationalists and the rise of the right, people around the world are demonstrating solidarity with the most marginalized. Humanitarian action is no longer the exclusive domain of governments, of the UN, of big aid. In many ways, it's being democratized. And a new generation of humanitarians is reclaiming that term and demanding a seat at the table and a voice in the conversation. In fact, the whole conception of humanitarianism is changing. Disaster relief and aid delivery isn't enough anymore. Today, it's about addressing root causes. It's about long-term approaches. It's about building resilience to help communities be able to help themselves. It's about power and agency. And it's about imagining a better world. Our new name reflects this changing landscape, and the new humanitarian will examine what humanitarianism means in the modern era. And we'll seek to speak to that wider audience of global citizens who we call new humanitarians, who feel they have a stake and a responsibility in making this world slightly more humane. So I've gotten questions from a number of you. What about the old humanitarians, quote unquote? And I'd like to assure you that our mission remains the same. We are here to inform crisis prevention and response. So this rebrand is in no way a means to ignore you. It is an opportunity to build on that audience of decision makers and practitioners in the humanitarian sector and take the urgency of these issues to a much wider audience. Crises are here to stay, and the wider world can no longer afford to walk away. And it is the strength of that mission to use journalism to improve the way the world responds to crises that has gathered you here today. And I want to thank you very much for being here, because we would have never survived the many challenges we have faced as a nonprofit news organization in a media industry in crisis had it not been for many of you. We have an incredible team of people, and that is our staff, many of whom are here today, our board, many of whom are here today, and our freelance contributors around the world. But we're also here because of many of you, our readers and our donors, who have believed that this endeavor was worth pursuing, who have believed that the aid industry and the world needs this kind of news, and who have believed that people with an unfair lot in life deserve to be heard. And perhaps most importantly, that we all believe that the world can be better than this. Thank you for the trust you have given us as your authoritative source on these critical issues of our time. Thank you very much. We take that responsibility seriously. The New Humanitarian stands for independence, it stands for courage, it stands for authenticity, and we take those values very seriously too. So I will leave it at that. Thank you for sharing this moment with us, and welcome once again to the New Humanitarian.
Thank you very much, Heba. I'm now pleased to introduce the world premiere of The New Humanitarian, which is a play written by Mike van Graan, who is a South African playwright who writes and creates theater about social justice issues. This one-man show is going to be performed by Daniel Richards. And for the lawyers in the room, this may or may not represent the views of The New Humanitarian. So please join me in welcoming Daniel.
I'll just put it a little bit.
Good evening. We're delighted to have a number of ministers for our panel discussion on the state of world peace as a part of the European launch of the New Humanitarian this evening. On my immediate right, we have the British Minister of Defence. Yes, hello from Brexit land. We're doing just fine. Just fine. Thank you very much. Wonderful to have you. On my far right, we have the German Minister of Homeland Security. On my far left, the French Minister of Foreign Affairs. Bonjour, bonjour. I would like to thank Africa for their contribution to our national football team. Oui, oui. Thank you. And on my immediate left, the Swedish Minister of Culture. Tack. I would like to begin by apologizing to Bono for again being overlooked for the Nobel Peace Prize. Love you too, Bono. Tack. Thank you, and thank you all for being here. Now, according to the latest Global Peace Index, the world is less peaceful today than at any point in the last decade. The index also suggests that Europe is one of the foremost peaceful regions in the world. Why do you think that is? Because we choose a measuring. Well, in Sweden, we prefer to make Volvos, ABBA revivals, and love, not war. But you have an arms industry where you make weapons for war. Well, yes, it's good for jobs. War is good for jobs, as long as the war doesn't happen in Sweden. Well, I agree with my Swedish colleague. Exporting weapons is good for the economy, and as you know, good economies make for peaceful societies. And while you have a good economy and peace in Britain, your weapons could be destroying other countries like Yemen, leading to famine, floods of refugees. How our weapons are used by other countries, that's not for us to say. You know, if we sell our cars to a country and that country says women can't drive those cars, who are we to say otherwise? Our cars create jobs in our economy. So you're okay with perpetuating the humanitarian crises abroad as long as it's good for jobs back home. Well, we also respond to the humanitarian crisis too. We provide medicine, doctors, food, which creates jobs for us. I think it's a virtuous circle. Creates the bombs, create jobs. Exports the bombs, create war, create humanitarian crises, create more jobs. Okay, so some people say that inequality is at the root of the crises. Inequality with regard to political power, military power, economic power, and cultural power. And it is inequality that is making the world less safe now. Listen, young man, Britain is pretty unequal, always has been. That's just how it is. It's not inequality that's the problem. It's that some people want what other people have without wanting to work as hard for it, or inheriting as much. My parents worked damn hard, as did their parents. Life in India wasn't all tea and cucumber sandwiches, I'll have you know. Okay. Now, how would you respond to those who say that Europe supported African and Arab authoritarian governments because it was beneficial for their economic and geopolitical interests, and now that those countries are collapsing, refugees are Europe's colonial and neo-colonial chickens coming home to roost? That's the kind of nonsense Jeremy Corbyn would say. It's just plain leftist rubbish. I think it's the Arab Spring that is causing all the trouble. There has been a lot more conflict since then. So are you saying that Europe should continue to support and have continued to support the dictators in Egypt and Tunisia? The region was a lot more stable then. And we didn't have a problem with the refugees that we have now. So for the sake of peace, are you saying that we should have human rights and democracy in the West and authoritarian governments elsewhere? Until such time that they're ready for democracy, yes. So where do you think the greatest threats to world peace will come from in the next 5 years? Russia. I think it wants to be a world power again, even if it means killing many innocents, like in Syria. I think it's Africa, with the millions of desperate people. The desperate people do the desperate things. Definitely Iran. Yes, if it continues to threaten Israel, we'll have an Armageddon. Donald Trump is dismantling the basic architecture for world peace. So how do you think Russia, Iran, and other African countries would respond to the question about the greatest threats to world peace? Anyone? No? Well, let me take advantage of this moment of silence and say that as an independent news organization, we may not be able to avert humanitarian crises, but we sure as hell will play our role in exposing their root causes and asking the questions to those who have real power over other people's lives. At the New Humanitarian, we also try to give space to voices that are seldom heard, voices that may make some of us uncomfortable, but voices that need to be heard. One way we do this is through our In Your Words poetry competition. So we will share 2 poems with you, one by a Zimbabwean and the other by a Palestinian. Good evening. Good evening. My name is Farai. I come from Zimbabwe. This poem genuflects to former South African President Thabo Mbeki and the speech that he gave to the parliament some time back. I am an African. I owe my being to the hills and the valleys, the mountains and the glades, the rivers, the deserts, the trees, and the ever-changing seasons that define one face of my native continent, from which I would flee if I had the means. Am thinking of fleeing, have now fled. For another face is of power in continents, a president for life in Cameroon, killer president in Khartoum, Nairobi, Bujumbura, a thief president in Equatorial Guinea, rulers without shame. Now I'm a president without the P, abroad. Yes. Taken to lands far away, in chains against my will. Now denied entry to self-same lands as someone free yet not free to travel freely. Still, I'm a professor in New York, a musician in Lisbon, a footballer in France, a kagad in Cape Town. I am an African. I am a pin-up girl for famine, a poster boy for AIDS, the cover pig for terror, the face of charity concerts though made faint by Syrian tears. I'm a runaway from hunger, an asylum seeker from war, a self-imposed exile from poverty, a refugee from false prophets of a better life now reserved for only a few. My body tells horror stories of white violence, of black hatred, of green envy, of red ideology, of rainbow-colored exclusion, of orange flames, silver bullets, and rusted brown machetes. I am an African. I'm an optimist, a pessimist, a socialist, a capitalist, an idealist, a pragmatist, a revolutionary, a conformist. I live, I love, I laugh, I cry. I hate, I weep, I get sick, I die. I'm black, I'm blacker, and then some. I am an African. But see me foremost, see me first, see me as human. I thank you. Thank you, Farai. The next poem is by Mohammed Farhat, based in Ramallah. The poem reflects on the Charlie Hebdo attacks by the Kouachi brothers and on how many people adopted the meme, I am Charlie Hebdo. And I think it's quite appropriate to be doing this poem so soon after what happened in New Zealand. I am not Charlie. Je suis Mustafa Wal Al Ghul. I am not Charlie. Je suis Rizq Abdul Taha. I am not Charlie. Je suis Muhammad Anas. Not 9 months old, we see in bomb-plowed Gazan soil a harvest of hypocritical terror. I am not Charlie, your latest banner of freedom, to say, to write, to draw, to be as you wish. Je suis Fadia, forbidden to wear what I like, to pray where I want, to protest terror in Palestine. I am not Charlie, with biographies, photographs, media profiles to build 3-dimensional monuments to your idea of freedom. I am the nameless, faceless, lifeless, collateral sacrifices on Charlie's altar of freedom. I am not Charlie, for democracy's drones are not done between the Pakistani limbs, in the Afghan rubble, amidst the Iraqi ruins, where my breaking voice is ridiculed by sirens. I am not Charlie, though I wished to be. But Fortress Europe turned me back. She'd had her way and had no further use. Back to my warring country, my republic of misery, my ghostly land, wrecked in Europe's generous arms, her tanks, her jets, her bombs. So you see, Charlie, I am not you. You are not me. We cannot be in this, our world of different worlds, both human, but only in form. For in life and even in death, you are Charlie, and I am not. Yet neither am I Brother Squatchy. At least, not yet am I. With all the talk about fake news, with journalists being targeted as enemies of the people, even in democracies, at the New Humanitarian, we value being critical, yet constructive, bold and provocative, and respectful and thoughtful at the same time, local and global, curious and open. We want to make journalism great again. Gather round, boys and girls, moms and dads. The story I'm about to tell you is Trumple Thinskin. There once, not so long ago, in fact, right now, lived an orange monster, Trumple Thinskin, with his 10-year-old son, his son's mother, and a Slovenian cat, meow, in a big white house. Starving after yet another day of pissing off Mexicans, Muslims, and Merkel, Trumple Thinskin had started dinner with his son while his son's mother grated carrots for the daily salad. Trumple Thinskin called out to his wife, "Melania, excuse me, Melania, get your immigrant ass in here, climb a wall, get a passport, just get your immigrant ass in here." Melania came in from the kitchen with her back towards Trumple Thinskin, for she knew I liked to grab her cat. Melania, why does Trumple Jr. have more peas than me? I should have the best peas. I should have terrific peas. Because you don't like peas, Trumple Thinskin, whimpered Melania, placing the carrot salad on the table. Trumple Thinskin took his son's plate, scraped the peas onto his own plate, took a photo, and posted it on Twitter. "Look, I have more peas, so many more peas, way more peas than my son," he announced to his millions of followers who all repeated, or rather retweeted the picture 500,000 times. Melania, I know we've run out of T-rump steaks, I know, but what is with the chicken? I asked for fish tonight, what is with the chicken? Well, someone issued executive order saying no more fishing in Yemen, whimpered Melania, still shielding her Slovenian cat from big Trumple Thinskin's small hands. That is fake news. I want fish. And with that, he called the chief of defense. "General, I want you to send some Marines to bomb the shit out of Yemen. Blow it up, make it go kaboom." What do you mean why? Because we can, damn it, and make sure they bring me back some fish. Some really, really terrific fish. No chips, just fish. For you see, boys and girls, Trumple Thinskin had more than enough chips on both shoulders. Trumpelthinskin looked at the carrot salad with disdain. Melania, excuse me, Melania, I've told you once, I've told you 1,000 times, I want my carrots grated more finely than this. I will make you great again, I promise you, I will make you great again. It was at times like these that Trumpel Jr. knew he had to intervene to protect his mom and her cat. Look, the birds, they're tweeting. Trumpel Jr. pointed one of his 17 silver spoons at the window. What are they saying about me? What are they saying about me? Trumpelthinskin's hair had gone a brighter shade of orange, for the carrot salad had gone straight to his head. Just then, the FBI, the fake Bureau of Intelligence, walked in to the dining room. Sir, we've received news that nude photographs of hundreds of female Marines have been shared in a closed Facebook group. Huge disaster, terrible, terrible disaster. If it's a closed Facebook group, how am I going to see the pictures? Well, actually, sir, we brought a computer that has access. We thought you might like to see them, sir. I'm going to share these with my friend Vladimir. Great guy, tremendous guy. You'll love him. I love him. Well, actually, sir, these were sent from Mr. Putin. He hacked into the closed Facebook group. Okay, all right, leave. Trumpelthinskin settled in front of Fox News to get his daily intelligence briefing. Just then, the phone rang. It was Kim Jong-un. Hello, my love. Hello, my love. I miss you too. I miss you too. Listen. You know those nuclear warheads you were going to get rid of? Yeah, Bibi's interested in them. Yeah, so for Israel, exactly. So I'll take 18% for facilitating the deal. I'll send you Ivanka's bank details. I love you more. I love you more. I love you. Just then, the other phone rang, and Melania thought to herself, this is like living in Obamacare call center. It was the head of defense. Sir, I'm sorry to have to tell you, but we lost some Marines in the Yemen. Yeah, whatever. Did you get my fish? My really, really terrific fish? Sir, I'm sorry to have to tell you, but we did not get your fish. You're fired. You are fired. This guy's such a loser, Junior. Do you want to be head of defense? I think you do a great job. I think you do a tremendous job. Well, actually, Dad, before Trumpel Jr. could answer, Trumpelthinskin's attention was captured by the alternative facts that kept rolling in from the television screen. The Mexicans had started to build a wall. The Saudis were funding it. Black Lives Matter were having tea with the Ku Klux Klan. There were good people on both sides. School shootings had declined because all the teachers were armed. Trumpelthinskin smiled as he tweeted, look, I kept my promise. We've taken our country back. What he forgot to say was by 70 years. The future of our planet and the well-being of us all depends on how far we go beyond the Trumpist I, we, and make us great again, to thinking in terms of we, us, and making all live decent, safe lives. So we end this part of the program by asking you to imagine a new world with apologies to John Lennon. Imagine Earth is heaven. No more bombs or war. Children do not die young. No rise in CO2. Imagine all our people living in harmony. Imagine a world order. No more talk of walls. All are treated equal. Women, blacks, the poor. Imagine all our people living a life in peace. You may say that I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope each day more will join us, and we can all live as one. Imagine no more hunger. All girls go to school. Children do not die young. No rise in CO2. Imagine all our people sharing in our world. Imagine life with no fear. The other doesn't scare. All hate and anger banished. We all learn to care. Imagine all our people living as people should. You may say that I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope each day more will join us, and we can all live as one. You may say that I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope each day more will join us, and we can all live as one.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for that performance, and thank you so much for Mike for that play that really puts into perspective some of the issues that we deal with, but in a more humoristic way. I'm now pleased to introduce the new president of the board of directors of the New Humanitarian, Paula Frey. Paula is an award-winning journalist. She's also an editor, trainer, and multimedia manager. She heads up one of Africa's flagship media organizations, and we're delighted that she's taken over from our outgoing president, Howard French, as our new chair. So welcome, Paula.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you very much. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Mike, for that play. I'm really honored to stand here today as the new president of the board of an organization that really has redefined humanitarian coverage since it was started in 1995. In less than a quarter of a century, IRIN has really set the agenda. It's been a benchmark for other journalists, but it's also really become a trusted source for policymakers, for practitioners, and for citizens around the world. Today, as we transition from IRIN to the new Humanitarian, it's a proud moment for me, but it's also a moment where really what we're doing is we're committing ourselves to putting quality, independent journalism at the service of millions of people affected by humanitarian crises in order to inform prevention and response. And in doing so, I believe that we must really be responsive to the seismic shifts that have happened in the world. As Heba was saying earlier on, you know, the humanitarian crises are changing. Our responses to humanitarian crises are changing, but the media is also changing. And the way we gather our stories, the way we tell our stories, the way we share our stories are changing. And the new Humanitarian really is at the right place in order to be able to tell those stories for a new and a growing audience. Our audiences are changing. Before, I mean, we certainly do intend to remain a trusted source for policymakers. But increasingly around the world, we recognize that the world's crises cannot be tackled by governments alone or by big institutions. And what we need to do is to make sure that these issues are also understood and available and accessible to ordinary people. What we know is that local voices and local responses are an integral part of the inside story. And IRIN and now the new Humanitarian really seeks to be able to amplify that. So to be clear, the new Humanitarian does intend to remain a trusted news source for policymakers and practitioners, but we also want to reach a wider audience of people who want to better understand our complex world in order to change it for the better. I want to just pay tribute to all the people who had made this possible, because I don't think that we would have been able to come here or be this part of our journey without a range of people who've really contributed. And I want to start off by saying that my predecessor on the board, Howard French, is really instrumental in focusing on the need for quality journalism in order to tell the story effectively. But the driver of this process today actually is Heba Ali, the director of IRIN and the director of the new Humanitarian. But also, there's an entire field of reporters out across the globe who are reporting these stories from the front lines, from our new catchphrases, from the heart of the crisis. And they're very ably led by Josephine Schmidt. And the editorial team. And then we also have a support team here in Geneva who really make it possible, make our dream for independent journalism possible. So I want to pay tribute to them. But our journey is not possible without, quite frankly, our audience, the readers around the world who have encouraged and supported the work of the new Humanitarian by using it to inform their own understanding and their actions in this field. And then finally, this journey is not possible without our donors and our funders. And we take seriously their investment in our work, and we honor it with quality, independent, and authoritative journalism, working to shape an agenda that can improve the lives of millions of people in conflicts, disasters, and humanitarian crises. I want to thank you, everyone here and also watching online. Thank you for being with us on our journey today. We hope that you will share it with other people. These stories are important. These stories are life-changing, and I'll hope that you'll continue the journey with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Paula, and we're delighted to have you as our chair. Now we're going to move to our editorial section, and I am very pleased to introduce our first executive editor, Josephine Schmidt. Josephine is an experienced journalist and newsroom leader and media strategist with over 17 years of international experience at the New York Times. She's lived around the world and joined us here in Geneva in 2018 as a key pillar of our strategy to make our journalism more accessible. And Josephine will join us now together with some members of our editorial team. So please join me in welcoming them.
Delighted to be here, but I will add that we're also a little scared of our chairs that have wheels. So if we wiggle around, it's not intentional. So thank you so much for being here and for supporting what we do every day and what our journalists in the field do. I'd like to introduce some of my colleagues from the newsroom. Annie Slemrod, who is our Mideast editor. Erwin Loy, who is our Asia editor. Andrew Gully, our managing editor, who runs everything and keeps everything going, and Ben Parker, who probably needs no introduction. He is our man about town and well-known in Geneva. So we wanted to give you a glimpse of some of the issues we deal with every day. We had thought about replicating one of our morning editorial meetings, which we hold every morning at 10 a.m., and then thought better of that, because that would mean some of us would be in pajamas and at least one of us would sound like a robot because of a bad Skype connection. So instead, we will give you a quick overview of our vision of reporting, why we do what we do, and then a glimpse into some of the issues that we deal with every day in bringing you the content that you look at on our site. And I think we have, yes, this is our new site, and we're very proud of this. It's just up today. Our web developer has been sequestered basically for the last 3 days to make sure nothing goes wrong, and he's also been dealing with power outages in Cape Town, so he's been finding very creative ways to keep his computer powered. So we will speak a bit about our coverage and then leave some time at the end for questions from all of you, and look forward to speaking with you afterwards as well for how we could shape our coverage to better serve you, and how we can help you better serve the people who you're working with in the humanitarian sector. We are using our correspondents around the world who we'd like you to meet at this moment.
This is Tomás Ayuso reporting from Tegucigalpa, Honduras.
I'm Hidayat Hassan. I report from Maiduguri and Abuja in Nigeria.
My name is Fiston Mahamba. I'm reporting from Goma.
My name is Philip Kleinfeld, and I'm here right now in central Mali, in the Mopti region, reporting on the rise of extremist violence and intercommunal conflict that has displaced all the people you can see around me right now.
This platform allows me to cover news way after, in a longer format, if the news cycle has moved on.
They help local people to show their daily life, the world, to see how it's going on here.
And the platform actually offers the opportunity to reach a greater number of people with incisive analysis.
I think they're some of the most underreported and urgent stories in the world.
Welcome to the New Humanitarian.
Welcome to New Humanitarian.
Welcome to the New Humanitarian.
Welcome to the New Humanitarian.
You know, the idea of humanitarian coverage can sometimes seem a bit foreign to journalists who come out of mainstream media organizations, as many of us have. And I know when I first joined what was then IRIN, some of my colleagues said, well, that sounds great, but won't it be difficult to really confine your reporting and your editing and your worldview to humanitarian topics? And in fact, I'm delighted to report that our portfolio, I believe, is almost every bit as broad as that of any large mainstream media organization. Of course, we report on war and on the work of making peace and keeping peace. We also report, however, on health, on the environment, on technology and its effect on society. We sometimes even do fashion. Thank you, Annie. And we have had a cat video, well, actually a GIF, of the cat man of Aleppo, also Annie. And our reporters who are out in the field can be doing any number of things any day, sometimes other than actually reporting. That can be, say, negotiating with the Afghan government and the Taliban to get access to newly flooded farm areas. It could be taking tea with some fighters who have newly left extremist groups. Or it could be trying to figure out if they go into an area where they're pretty sure the government's going to confiscate their equipment because they're asking questions that are not welcome, if an insurance policy, maybe ours, will pay for it. And sadly, or happily for us, our very patient finance director, Richard Golding, fields those questions and answers them. So their reporting is, of course, shaped by breaking news. It's also shaped by what we like to think of as our roadmap for our coverage throughout the year, which is an annual thought list. That list we put together of 10 humanitarian crises and trends. This year, we tried to be more holistic than in the past and really look for commonalities between many of the conflicts and humanitarian crises that are out there. These are the 10 topics. And we received a lot of feedback on the fact that we chose climate displacement as a key topic, as well as returns and rebuilding, rather than looking at the end of a conflict, but continuing through to post-conflict and beyond. So what does it mean if we take our reporters in the field, breaking news, and our list of 10 trends and crises to watch? That's really how we shape our day-to-day coverage. I think what we are looking at every day can change, of course. This week, the breaking news that was on our radar, and almost many others, was Mozambique. And Andrew really dealt with some of the issues that confront us when we're looking at breaking news.
Yeah, thank you, Josephine. Yeah, it's a tricky thing for us, and I think actually, thank you, Thomas. I also, the contributor there, kind of stitched us out of sight with his news cycle comment, but it is a tricky area because where do we add the most value? Yeah, I'm from a wire news background, and my instinct is certainly then was deploy. There's been a breaking news incident. Let's go straight away. Let's get on top of it. But actually, for the new humanitarian, we can't compete on that level and that speed with the bigger organisations, and I don't think it's a good way for us to spend our slightly limited resources. So we have to look at each incident that happens, and this week was a very good example because when it's a huge disaster, it really isn't difficult to know what to do. You know, live report, deploy everyone, get on top of it as soon as possible. It's something like Mozambique, where at the start you don't really know the full picture. You immediately look at the possibilities, and we did, but it's very difficult to say immediately in that first 24-hour period, is this worth sending someone? If we can, how much is this going to cost? We've got to work out the cost. First of all, if you don't have someone on the ground immediately in that country, then you have to look at the options. For Mozambique this week, the first option we had was probably a videographer to get in who might have needed a fixer, translator, and maybe a text person with them. Also, I think it's $1,500 was the registration fee that Mozambique was asking for just for accreditation. So you're looking at about $10,000 just before you've got going with story fees and all the rest of it. So we've got to look at our budget and go, you know, in the first 24 hours, when you don't really know the scale of what's going on, is that the best use of our time? And often we would love to give us the money, we would love it. But the fact is, if we deployed every time in the first 24 hours of every disaster that looks like it could scale up, we wouldn't last 3 months, let alone a year. So we often have to navigate that by thinking, what can we do? How can we add value? And we'll look at doing a briefing piece, which we actually put one out today, summing up everything we can and using all of our contacts without being on the ground, but trying to find out the fullest picture we can without being there, while thinking, how can we get someone there at a more reasonable price, which is within our means. So at the same time, this was affecting Zimbabwe, so we deployed someone immediately in Zimbabwe. We have a Zimbabwe story that I think will add a lot of value there, because not a lot of people are focusing on Mozambique, but in the longer term, given Zimbabwe's parlous state economically and food security before, it may end up being a massive long-term problem for them as well. So, I mean, it is about the long term. I think maybe Owen can speak more to that, to an earlier natural disaster that affected Indonesia.
Yeah, 6 months ago in Sulawesi, in Indonesia, there was an earthquake and tsunamis, and it did a lot of damage. And right away, it was a big international news story. But how do we cover it with our resources? And I think the key for us was to continue coverage of it. We had a person there 3 days after it hit, but the thing is, he stuck around for 2 weeks, and then he came back a month later, and he's there right now for us, and we'll be running a couple stories next week, which is about 6 months after the disaster. So I think the key is to keep following these stories. It's not about what happens on day one. It's about how the community recovers, and it keeps going on from there.
So we often find that for breaking news, where we can add the most value is really curating a lot of the coverage that's out there, a lot of the news that we're getting from various NGOs that are on the ground in the first few days, and then deploying a bit later and really being there for the long haul. On the other end of the spectrum, really, of our coverage to breaking news are neglected crises, and that's something that IRIN has been committed to since it was founded, and the new Humanitarian will, of course, continue this commitment. These are stories that are often overlooked by mainstream media because they're too far off the radar, they're just too complicated, they're too far away, they're too forgotten to everyone except the people whose lives are affected, the people who are at the core. We are planning some coverage in the coming weeks of some of conflicts that we consider neglected. We recently did some coverage out of Ethiopia, and Andrew, you worked on that. Could you talk a bit about the motivations behind that piece, but also behind our commitment to neglected crises?
Sure. I think this is a real area where we can add value, given the sort of state of the media at the moment. Not only cutting cutbacks to foreign departments, but also that attitude, which I think is just if it's not affecting us, then we don't worry about it. Which is the way the sort of the media landscape seems to be. So there are so many stories out there for us that are neglected, and whether that's us deciding we want to do them or the pitches coming in to us. And Ethiopia was a good example because this was something that we decided to do and tried to find someone who could do it. For the first half of last year, the biggest displacement internally in the world was happening in Ethiopia. A lot of it in the Gadea and West Kuji area where this photo is taken. Eventually, it took time to find the right person who could do this well, who could give it the sort of nuance that was required and get there. And eventually, we found someone who could do it and got them there as soon as possible. But with this sort of story, it's not a breaking news. There's no rush. No one else is going to do it. It's just when we can and do it well. And the reaction already. I mean, I think on the back of this report that we did, the local government in that area for the first time appealed to the main Ethiopian government and got humanitarian funding for these people, and it happened within weeks of our story. So it just shows that we can actually have an impact quite quickly on these neglected crises. You might think it's just dropping in an ocean and nothing ever happens, but it does make a difference sometimes.
And it's reporting that we're only able to do because of our correspondents in the field, many of whom make their homes in the places from which they report, and others of whom have made it their business to become experts in the regions from which they are reporting. On the other end of the neglected crises are so many that are sort of out there in the mainstream world. Syria, Yemen, these are names you hear all the time. Yes, you probably hear something every day, but do you ever remember it, and does it ever stay with you? We struggle, like much other media, with reader fatigue, oftentimes with just readers not knowing what to do with this information that we give them. It can be nearly paralyzing sometimes to read a lot of not only our coverage, but coverage of humanitarian crises, of conflicts, and not really know where to turn, how to help, what to do. And so we're always asking ourselves, how do we pass the who cares hurdle? And that's something that Annie is especially adept at answering, since she is reporting and editing from the Mideast.
I am reporting and editing on many crises that many people don't care about. Therefore, for example, everyone who works with me, and also most people who have the fortune or misfortune of knowing me, are very sick of hearing about Yemen and why no one cares about Yemen. I'm not sure that I've actually cracked how to get people to care about Yemen yet. However, I think one of the ways that we've tried to do this in our reporting is to personalize words that come up in a lot of press releases that probably you guys write and release, and that we also put in news reports, like internally displaced person, reconstruction, things like that. And we try to sometimes put a human face on those stories.
And you did that last year with the story that we have here.
Right. Well, yeah, it's a really long story, so if you didn't read all of the words, I will give you the summary. This is a story about a young kid that I met in internally displaced persons camp in Iraq in 2016, called Othman, although I didn't actually know his name at the time, and went back to try to find him, which was quite a mission. But the point is that he and his family had been displaced and experienced a lot of, and gone home, and experienced a lot of the things that have happened in the past few years in Iraq. And I would say the humanitarian crisis for them is far from over. There aren't that many headlines on Iraq anymore. And Islamic State was officially defeated in Iraq in December 2017, but the impacts of the people who have had to deal with the fallout for this kid and his family and his village and lots of other villages like them, they continue.
So it was an exercise in figuring out, after you had done all the reporting, how do we really make this, how do we allow readers to engage with this, and how do we allow them to understand and feel some of what Annie found? And I think we went through 3 or 4 drafts of that story.
I threw away so many drafts. You didn't see them. Yeah. You don't want to know how many drafts there were.
I'm being polite.
Yeah. Thank you.
And we then realized, in fact, that the rise and fall of IS really mirrored the life of this little boy, Othman. So we were able to address some of the wonky facts that we needed, the numbers, which can be very numbing in any story, and just some of the cold, hard knowledge of what we had to put in there, along with by juxtaposing it with the lifetime of this little boy. So our all-round web producer, designer, Whitney Patterson, who is here somewhere, came up with the great idea of displaying the story with 2 timelines on either side of the page, so you could scroll down, and I hope you will do that on our site. And I mention that only because I think it's our job as journalists not only to report the stories, but to make sure that they reach an audience and that they resonate with an audience, and that you'll not only read it, but that it's information you can use, and hopefully it's information you can share. And Annie, you also, in reporting of Othman and in dealing with a number of stories from the Middle East, one of the things that we look at very closely, or we try to be increasingly conscious of, is the number of voices and the diversity of voices that we include in our reporting. And that's not unusual. It's something many media organizations are trying to do now. I think for us, maybe it's even more important than a mainstream media, because humanitarian crises often impact women much more severely than they do men for a number of reasons. And you've been very good at trying to include women's voices.
I've been trying. In addition to having Ben collect for me what some of you may know as dignity kits from across the world, talk about
what are
a
those?
dignity kit, for those of you who do not know, is something that it's only been around for, I think, about 15 years, yeah, that are handed out by various humanitarian organizations to women who've just been displaced or were in camps, etc. And they differ depending on the region, but they tend to sometimes they include a hijab, they usually include underwear, and they include sanitary napkins, which, as I have in my growing collection, and you will in forthcoming reporting, or maybe not super dignified, and something that we could all work on. But anyway, this comes up. There are women's issues that don't always get talked about in the media, partly because one of the things is that our reporters don't want to ask women about them. And in Yemen, we have an ongoing stringer who's great. He does a really good job. But I started to notice that every piece he filed was only quoting men. And I was like, Nasser, what's the deal? You know, I know you know some women. I know there's women in your pictures. I know there's women at the hospital. He was reporting on this huge cholera outbreak. And he admitted to me that, first of all, he was reporting from quite a conservative community, and it wouldn't really be appropriate for him to go up and talk to women to ask them about the symptoms of cholera, which, as you guys know, maybe, you know, women or men, nobody wants to talk about that stuff. And especially conservative society, it's super awkward. So actually, we ended up enlisting his wife, and she's now stringing for us too. And they are a great husband and wife team. She's happy. People are happy to talk about bodily functions to her or about other things, because we also report on other crises that do not involve bodily functions. And that's one way that we've got women voices into our coverage. We need more women reporters. We need more women reporters. We need more women in our stories, and we're trying. Yeah, and Nasser and his wife are doing a great job.
Well, the idea of ensuring that there are diverse voices in our stories also impacts a lot of the work that Irwin does when covering local aid. I always find Irwin eminently quotable, and one of many lines that he said that sticks in my head is he said, local aid coverage is a matter of representation. So I'd love it if you could talk a little bit about what that means.
Sure, thanks. I see the way we approach local aid or our coverage about local aid as representation, because I think it's similar to the broader discussions that are taking place in mainstream media and society about visibility and representation of minority groups in the media. I think as journalists for the longest time, and it continues to be the case, I think we go to the easiest sources for information. The people that are in our stories quoted as experts are internationals. They're not the locals who actually live in the areas or are from the same countries or communities where the crises hit. And that's quite common, and there's a reason for that. So I think it's about, like Annie says, acknowledging the problems we have, and acknowledging the weaknesses, what's missing from our reporting. So for us, we're looking to highlight some of the local aid responses that happen around the world, because I think, as we know, if we're continuously leaving out the voices of local people, then it's really not telling the full story in our reporting. So what's behind us here is some of our reporting on local aid and local humanitarian action, and so we're trying to increase this, and we'll be increasing it more in the coming year. And so I think we have one example of it. It's a clip from a short video in the Rohingya refugee camps. As you know, there are dozens and dozens of NGOs, international agencies, UN agencies there. There's also many local organizations, and they work often behind the scenes, but they actually do the bulk of the work in many of these projects. And so this particular video is looking at one tiny organization staffed by 3 people, which is working on palliative care in the Rohingya camps, and it's run by Dr. Farzana Khan. And so in this very short clip, we will meet her and one of her patients.
I Adiballaya Sai, Dejbedij Dabalaya Sai, I on Desha Saina, Varibedisha Saina, I Bangladesh on the Lasukano.
I provide palliative care from Dhaka to Rohingya camp. Whenever one patient is referred to me, I would send this information to my palliative care assistant. He would go to the patient's home and get some photographs, also a short video. Then I decide what this patient's need is and then give prescription. In Rohingya camps, the international agencies, they play the main role, but the local small organizations are left behind. But I think they should give a chance to prove themselves. With one palliative care assistant and one palliative care consultant, we have already seen more than 1,000 patients. Most of the patients have a major difference in their lives. Not only the patient, in families' lives also. We are human beings. Every human being has a responsibility to take care of other human beings. We just cannot see what they are experiencing. We must have to take steps to reduce their sufferings.
So that's one of several videos that we'll have coming out over the next few weeks. So look out for those on our website. And also tomorrow, if you're interested in discussions about localization and local aid, we'll be doing a webinar at 1 p.m. Geneva time. You can find information about that on the events page on our website and on Twitter.
And our local aid reporting started as a project and now has become really an integral part of our reporting throughout all of our reporting, even if we have a story that's not specifically focused on local aid. And in our quest, of course, to have a diversity of voices, we will try to always find someone who's on the ground, an organization that is on the ground. And in a way, too, we want our coverage to reflect the conversations and the issues that are going on within the humanitarian sector as a whole. And as you know better than I do, local aid has been held up and embraced and not embraced over the last few years. And so we're really pleased to be able to chronicle that change that's going on. But in addition to our to having our coverage rooted from within the sector, we also look at our coverage as a watchdog over the sector. And this week, one of our stories was on Innovation 3.0 by Ben. It's not a new idea. So why, Ben, was this the week for that story?
Well, we did innovation, something about innovation this week because we got a tip-off. Thank you very much to the tipster. You're all welcome to tip. I will repay you in coffees and beverages. But we depend really a lot on brave, thoughtful, principled people working here in the belly of the beast in Geneva. In this case, one of the prestigious, somewhat perhaps overhyped initiatives on innovation was running into financial trouble. And that maybe is fine, fail forward after all. But it did give us a chance to have a fair, what we think is a fair look at the innovation landscape and the whole sort of panoply of players in that space. I think the 3.0 thing is a bit of a stretch. Well, 1.0 is drones and VR. 2.0 is trying to do like less stupid things. And 3.0 is like doing it right and making a difference. I think that's what it means.
Are we there yet? Not there yet.
Yeah, but, can we just play with drones a bit more? So that was an example where, you know, it's not a scandal. It's not. We're not out for gotchas and negativity. We would like to catch aid workers and leaders and community representatives doing the right thing. Frequently, we do also find examples of less fantastic behavior. And, you know, what I do, and I think all of us do, is pretty conventional journalism, really. It makes industries better. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. And we, you know, would encourage all of you to see the future of humanitarianism to be a little less opaque, a little less secretive, a little less driven by institutional agendas and PR, and a little more humility. So we were across a number of themes in the sector. This one about Palantir, I mean, in the end, it could actually have a positive impact. There have been meetings earlier this week organized about data protection, and WFP is engaging with that, and we're open to discussion about its partnerships and data privacy in general. So we try to have a positive impact. Sometimes that may be uncomfortable for those who experience it, but on the whole, I think it ought to make for a better deal for those in need.
And on the subject of tips, I just want to announce that we have hired our first investigative editor, Paisley Dodds, who is here. And so we're all ears, I'll let you know. So we would love if you have anything to whisper in our ear or any little text to send us. We're here. We're ready. We'd love to take a few minutes for questions that anyone might have about our coverage, how we report, what we report on, or if you have thoughts for how we could better serve you. Okay.
I am a bad journalist. I never got any award, and I never will. I understand that your agency is a first-class reporting agency, and I quite believe that, and that you address crucial issues. But to make sure that we understand words the same way, one of you made an imprudent statement that you explain the real, true root causes of conflicts. Are you sure that any of you five can explain beyond common knowledge the true root cause of the war in Crimea, in Bosnia, in Darfur, in Somalia, the Spanish Civil War, even one century later, the First World War?
No, that's a great question, and I wonder if it was planted because it goes to our new logo, which, as you notice, has a cursor at the end, which signifies that the story is never finished. We are always writing. So no, we never feel that we write a story and these are the answers. We feel that it's our role to gather information, to provide views from many, many different perspectives, and we're not here to be peacemakers or war makers or policy makers. We're here to provide the information that perhaps can be used in all of those roles.
Thank you. Mark Engelhardt, I'm a correspondent here with German National Public Radio, and I've been an adept IRIN reader in the past decades. What I'd like to know is about funding. I guess leaving the UN also offered new opportunities to become more independent in terms of funding. How did that turn out? Who's paying for what you do, actually? And how much of your money actually goes to the reporting in the field? Thanks.
I will be happy to answer that. The bulk of our budget goes to commissioning and to reporting. And yes, I wasn't with IRIN when it was in the UN or when it left the UN. I can say that in the past year, when I have, since I joined IRIN, we have seen an uptick in our funders and an interest in funding. Our model is that of any not-for-profit news organization, in that we're mission-driven. We're looking for funders who not necessarily share our vision, but who support our vision. And so that can be a whole range of, it can be from private foundations to individuals to, in some cases, governments. And I'm sorry, but that is our last question. So I am going to thank you, and I hope that you will follow our stories and help us tell the stories of people on the ground, people who are at the heart of some of the world's greatest crises and the events that really are shaping our world today. And you'll find us on our site, you'll find us on social, and please subscribe to our newsletter.
Okay. Thank you so much, and this is part of our great editorial team. To give you a full sense of the team more broadly, I'd like to invite everybody on stage from the new Humanitarian team, board, and staff members. Please come up on stage so you can see. Yeah, hide. Come. You don't hide. Hide. Come. No hiding behind the chairs. Sorry. Okay. Come on up. Go. You guys. No. Please, go. So please join me in giving a warm applause to the new Humanitarian.